Welcome back, everyone. It's 7:07. Election day is sneaking up, and heated debates are stirring all over our state. Alex Cameron has more on the issues that are catching Oklahomans' attention.
Joining us now, Pat McGuigan with CapitolBeatOK.com. Pat, thanks so much for being with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
You're writing about a number of different, and always are writing about a number of different topics on your blog. The one that I think really stands out for me right now, and I think is going to stand out for everyone, is State Question 744. There's a lot of money that's been infused, and this is going to be a big topic of in the media coming up this fall. What do you think what is your biggest concern with 744? What's the biggest concern for our viewers, for taxpayers?
First thing I'll say is that it is definitely heating up because the proponents have done major media buy and they're starting to do their thing. The opponents are still engaging primarily, it looks like, in argumentation. You have a very interesting coalition, and I guess the most intriguing thing to me in the last week and a half has been some strong proponents of public school finance and funding coming out in opposition to 744, specifically Lex Holmes, who was one of the godfathers, if you will, of House Bill 1017 20 years ago.
Larkin Warner.
And Larkin Warner, the OU and OSU, one retired, one still active, economics professor. So on the argumentation side, that's significant. Then on the other side, the proponents have begun to spend a lot of money. And they've got a lot of money because they got national funding. The concern that's being raised is the impact on the rest of state government at a time that the budget picture is already complicated and very challenging. $500 million plus or minus
and we should
into
just
the coming
clarify
cycle.
Real quickly that this is the question. This is the ballot measure that would require that Oklahoma spend on, its per pupil, raise its per pupil spending to the regional average.
Yeah, it's a 3-year phase-in to get there. That would start in the fiscal year after its passage, if it passes, and estimates range from as low as $850 million to as much as $1.7 billion. Somewhere in between that probably is the truth on what it'll cost in that third year. So you have ramp-up costs over a 3-year period to get full implementation. Now you just add whatever the figure is, add that on top of the $525 million that some are saying is the shortfall for the coming budget cycle, 744 aside. And Treasurer Meacham would say it's a little less than that, and some conservative analysts might say it's a little higher. Whatever it is, it takes a difficult situation and makes it more difficult for the rest of government. And that makes this a reasonable proposition to be arguing about.
And that's the argument of the opponents, is that it will force these other state agencies to have to make drastic cuts at a time when they've already made cuts, and it'll be even more difficult. Their proponents, of course, saying we have to make education a priority, and the state hasn't done so, and this will force us to do so.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument whether, if you look at 1017 and you look at things at the local level like Maps for Kids, it's somewhat debatable that the state has not already made it a priority, given that, okay, if we're 49th or 48th or 47th in per pupil spending, but we're 42nd or 43rd in the country in per capita personal income, the gap's not huge, whereas this has a more dramatic effect than that. There's strong arguments on both sides. It's going to be very contentious by the end, and it's beginning to get that way right now.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the 5th Congressional District race. Dave White, independent, who has some nice credentials, not a lot of political background, but still was viewed as potentially a force in this race, decided to drop out.
Yeah, a very credible guy, well-spoken, distinguished military record as a SEAL. Throwing his support to Langford, who Langford's kind of the talk of Oklahoma politics in some ways, because of coming from way back in the field as a political unknown to first do incredibly well in the primary and then thump Kevin Calvi 2-1 in the runoff. And then what makes all this still interesting to me is that the Democrats have put forward a very credible nominee, mainstream Democrat, maybe even slightly conservative Democrat in Billy Coyle, a distinguished record of his own as an attorney, but also as a Marine Corps veteran. So you've got a Marine Corps vet and a political newcomer from the two parties. White was a complicating factor for Langford. Now he's not. because his endorsement is certainly very welcomed, as you saw the other day in the coverage. Langford was thrilled to get it, and probably makes Coyle's task even tougher in a tough year
Would
for
seem
Democrats.
to tip the scales a bit more toward Langford in this race.
Yes, although I think Mr. Coyle will show up with some resources at the end, and he'll be presentable in interviews with guys like you, and he'll do well if there's debates.
Finally, let's talk about Sarah Palin. We saw where she's certainly having an impact nationally. On some of the primaries this week, we could see her footprint on some of the results. Speech on Wednesday night. What do you make of her? What's her political future?
Her political future is not defined, but it's inevitably going to be interesting. Palin has endorsed the winner in 70% of the races that she's spoken out on. That's very impressive. That doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. That's an impressive percentage, and especially a couple of the dark horses, including the other day in the Delaware race, where Mike Castle was defeated by Christine O'Donnell. That, frankly, is the one that probably surprised me the most, and might present the most problems for the Republicans in November. We'll see. She's proving resilient, and Palin is, again, being very deft in who she's endorsing, because she's endorsing not only strong conservatives like herself, she's endorsing people that are winning. And politics is about a lot of things. It's about people, it's about personnel, it's about policy. In the end, it's about elections. And she's been picking winners in elections. Ultimately, the verdict on that will be delivered in November, and then that might dictate some things about her political future. We'll see. Whether she ever runs for president, you have to believe all of this looks like the walk-up to a presidential run. Even if she doesn't do that, I think we're going to be hearing a lot from Sarah Palin for a long time.
All right, Pat, thanks. And people can read more about these and other topics on your blog, CapitolBeatOK.com.
I hope they do. We'd love to have them.